1984-85 school year is going to, that's the watershed in my teaching career. That's the year that my class, sixth graders at Howard School, taught me how much 12-year-olds can learn about history and research and those other things that go to make that a real discipline. It just so happened that year that a friend of mine, Ed Gortney, told me about 3 old graves on the banks of the Chowchilla River. Well, I have this morbid interest in old graves, and the older I get, the more intense that interest becomes. He took me out there and showed me the 3 graves, and there they were. On the left-hand side was Jonas Minturn, born in 1819, died in 1894. I'm sorry, 1884. In the middle was Roland Robinson Minturn, born in 1845 and died in 1894. And on the end was his mother, Abby West Minturn, born in 1820, died in 1899. She had an epitaph on her tombstone that said, "Her children shall arise and call her blessed." That stuck with me. The 3 old lonely graves out there interested me because nobody in town knew about them. I came to Madera. Everybody knew the graves were there, but nobody knew anything about the Minturns. Who were they? We had Minturn Road, we had Minturn Almond Holler, we had Minturn Cotton Gin. We knew at one time these folks were significant. How could it be that they have now been forgotten? So I went to my principal, Dr. Pam Noley, and I said, is it possible we could do a project where the kids are doing research and maybe we can find out who these people were and tell the community? She went for it, so we took the kids out there to the graves and we gathered around them. And I said, look guys, this man and this woman, when they were born, James Monroe was the president. Now, folks, that takes us back a long, long ways. And this guy, he was born before the Civil War. And you know what? These people came here, and they lived, and they loved, and they died, and now they're forgotten. Well, if you know anything about 6th graders, they can't abide any unfairness. I said, this is unfair. And they said, that's right. What are we going to do about it? And I said, well, tell you what, we're going to dig them up. And so, wait, no, put the shovels back. That's not what I mean. We're going to dig them up in the only human way possible. We're going to give them a resurrection. We're going to follow the paper trail that they left. We're going to find out who they were. And we may even write a book about this. Tell the community. So, we went back to school, got a lot of help. Audrey Poole, a genealogist, and the parents, and the school district. And we started. The first thing I had to teach them was what's a primary source document? Well, they found out very quickly when Joel Kripe, whose dad was the ag commissioner, came in with the death certificate of the guy buried in the middle. And well, tell us, what did you find out, Joel? He said, Mr. Coach said, Roland Robinson Minturn committed suicide on the banks of the Chowchilla River. Wow, suicide, not exactly where I'd want to take these 6th graders. But we continued the search for primary source documents. Joel, emboldened by the enthusiasm that he had created in the class, talked to his dad, let's go find another primary source document. So in a couple of days he was back in class with the coroner's report of the man buried in the middle, Roland Robinson Minturn. Teach us, Joel, what'd you find out? It says here, Mr. Code, that Roland Robinson Minturn committed suicide on the banks of the Chowchilla River by slitting his own throat. I look out across the class. Have I traumatized these kids? Do I need a psychologist? What am I doing? And I'm looking, and they're all going, he slit his own throat. Great. History is fun. And from that moment on, I could have unhooked them from that project. Angela Elliott brought in the next primary source document. And that was the Great Register from 1894 that showed all of the male members of the family, to every scar, color of hair, color of eyes, and it told us where they were from. They were from Bristol, Rhode Island. So we decided to link up with a class at Bristol, Rhode Island, and we would exchange documents. Bearing in mind the inscription on Abby's tombstone, her children shall arise and call her blessed. Now we have children on both sides of the country arising to call her blessed. Well, we taught the kids where to go to look for primary source documents, and the next treasure that we found was the 1850 census, where we found them in Bristol, Rhode Island. Then in 1860 we found them. They had 6 children. So we knew there had to be a living descendant. So we continued to the document search. Audrey traced the family back to the 1600s, and we found land deeds that showed that they had purchased 5 sections of land, $2.50 an acre, out there in 1870. But what we were really after was a living descendant. We want a living Minturn. Well, the land deeds of the 1920s showed a Ward B. Minturn. Okay, who was Ward B. Minturn? We started looking through obituaries of Fresno B, and there we found it in 1957. Mr. Kimball? No, he's deceased. Well, but his wife is still living. Okay, hopes are soaring, but she's not the one you want. They were divorced. But I know where the one you want is. Hope soared. So he gave me the name of Elizabeth Minturn Denning, who was living in Santa Cruz. Gave me her phone number. She was 70 years old at the time, and I thought, well, I got to be careful here, because 70 years is really pretty old, and I expected a little lady who could barely hold a fountain pen. But I called her. Mrs. Denning, tell me, are you the daughter of Ward B. Minturn? She said, yes. Are you the granddaughter of Thomas Minturn? Yes. Are you the great-granddaughter of Abby West Minturn? She says, yes. What are you selling? I said, no, we're not selling anything, but I have a really neat story to tell you. And I told her. She was flabbergasted. She sent us her father's handwritten memoir of what it was like to be raised by that little grandmother, Abby West Minturn, out on that ranch. And he told us what she was like. He put flesh on those old dry bones. 5 feet tall, but with the heart of a lion. A dreamer of a husband who was always trying one scheme after another and never quite making it come together. He has the audacity in 1884 to just up and die. Leaves her out there on that desert, which is what that was at the time, to make the desert blossom. She did raise those kids and grandkids, and then she died in 1899. Well, by March, we're ready to write her story. How do we do that? Let's write her diary for her. So each kid took a year in her life and wrote things that could have happened based upon the solid facts of their research. They wrote a diary she could have written, and we call it the Minturn Chronicles. But that wasn't enough. We had to have a real period at the end of the story, so we went back out to the graves with parents and other helpers, and we fixed it up, painted the outrageous graffiti off of the house, and poured cement around the graves so that they wouldn't be kicked over again. And we made ready for a ceremony. On June the 5th, 1985, I'll never forget it, 300 or 400 people out there in that cotton field. And the kids all lined up, they're dressed to the nines, they just looked beautiful. Over here, the 3 graves, and the little ragtag band of playing, and one by one those kids came up to that microphone and they told what it was like to be Abby in the year for which they were responsible. And then when they were all through, they each took a carnation, went over to her grave and laid it at her tombstone. When they were finished, the kids were all lined up, all dressed to the nines, as I said, a line of flowers. The little band of bugler, he blew taps, and there wasn't a dry eye in the place. And at that time, I looked and the flags were flowing, gentle breeze blowing, and I asked myself, my goodness, what has happened here? And I purpose never ever will I teach history the same way again. Never again am I going to ask a class, read the chapter and answer the question at the end of the book. No more. That changed my life. But we weren't through yet. That famed novelist, Irving Stone, biographical novelist, sold 60 million books. He heard about us, and so he sent congratulations and even the foreword for our book. Word came to us a few weeks later that Irving Stone and his wife Jean wanted to come to us, and he wanted to meet these men, we're calling them now the Minturn scholars. So Jean and Irving Stone came to Madera to meet these kids, and we were just full of eager anticipation. Stone met with them in the library at Madera High School, spent an hour and 10 minutes telling them what it was like to be rejected 17 times in Lust for Life. And she told how Clarence Darrow was her favorite of her husband's characters, and answered questions, and it was pure elixir that morning. Then, that afternoon, he went out there at the amphitheater at Madera High School and met with the kids and their parents and talked to them. And it was at that time that he turned to the audience and turned to the kids, and he said, I would like for this to be known as the Madera Method. And you know, it stuck. The projects became known as Madera Method projects. One project after another for the next 20 years. Out of the cemeteries, documents of Madera County came school projects that have become ingrained in our Madera history, in our Madera culture. All because 36 kids revealed the extent to which they can think and empathize with history. They became not passive recipients of the past, but glorious participants in their own history. And they will be remembered for that, I think, forever.
Tells us the Minturn Chronicles brings a Valley pioneer family back to life.
It all started with 3 old forgotten graves on the banks of the Chowchilla River, discovered by Howard School's 6th graders and their instructor, Bill Cook. On the site lie the remains of the Minturn family, Jonas, Abby, and son Roland, who settled here in the 1800s. That discovery resulted in a one-of-a-kind history project. Today, the kids mark the completion of the Minturn Chronicles, having traced their roots to Rhode Island and back 350 years to England.
What used to be the Minturn home place now sits mutually awaiting its ultimate fate. In a sense, the woman and the house share as much in death as they did in life.
Their research also led to direct descendants, some who came from as far away as Pennsylvania.
It's so meaningful with all those young people involved and all like that. It just does my heart good. I feel like grassroots are alive.
It's almost kind of embarrassing that when you see it, these kids know more about your own family and your heritage than you do.
At one time, the Minturns owned a winery and gave their name to a town just north of Chowchilla, but it too is now just a memory. The kids say they adopted Abby, bearing in mind the inscription on her tombstone.
her children have indeed arisen to call her blessed.
Roger Lucille, 47, Eyewitness News.
That's our report, World News Tonight.
Has their work been published? The next chapter is a world-famous writer coming to call on the young authors. Bonnie Montevecchi has the details.
The 19th century matriarch of a Madera County family has stepped out of the grave and into the imaginations of 36 youngsters at Howard Elementary School. What happened next is a real-life page-turner with a storybook ending for the kids. The Minturn Chronicles, which traces the life of Abby Minturn, began last year when teacher Bill Cope became fascinated with 3 graves of the Minturn family. 3 graves no one seemed to know much about until his class began a year-long research and writing project.
Was this hard to do? How hard was this to research this? Well, you just have to know where you go, and I had somebody help me. I got a lot of documents. Well, I learned a lot of history, and that it's really fun to write a book.
Book sales have already netted $4,000 for a scholarship fund for Madera students. But the sequel to all this success is the planned visit by author Irving Stone. So impressed when he heard of the Minturn Chronicles, he's donating 40% of the sales of his new book, Depths of Glory, to the Madera Minturn Scholarship Fund.
My feelings are beyond words. The magnitude of Mr. Stone is well known. To be a part of bringing children and Irving Stone together in a writing situation is just more than any teacher could hope for.
The public is invited when Irving Stone comes to Madera on October 12th. He'll be there from 1 until 4 at the Madera High Amphitheater. At Howard School, Bonnie Montevecchi.
They were visited by world-famous author Irving Stone, as we learn in this report from John Allison.
It might have been the final chapter to an adventurous and educating experience for all of these youngsters. Stone got interested in the Howard School class when it spent much of last year working on a writing project that mushroomed into a nationally known piece of work. The Minturn Chronicles told the story of an old family in Chowchilla that had evolved from 17th century England. For an hour and a half, he offered tips and answered questions from his young colleagues. And although some of them may have gotten distracted a time or two, many came away with the thought that something real neat had just happened.
It's wonderful. It's great because after just talking to him, I've never been able in my life to see anybody so famous before. I was just thrilled that he could come and see us, and that I got, just when I shook his hand, it kind of, I trembled. It's real neat that he was able to see us.
And their guests of honor seem to have enjoyed the session just as much as the kids.
I've never had a group like this who not only did the research, but many drafts which they corrected and edited with Bill Coates' help. And now they've gotten out a book which I've read, and the writing in it is surprisingly good. There are no misspellings, no errors. I'm maybe even a little envious of these 12-year-old kids.
In Madera, John Allison, 47 Eyewitness.